Well, now we're going to hear from leaders working towards solutions to the climate crisis. This is an issue that's ever present and emergent. And here to moderate this discussion, please join me in welcoming Gina Barbieri. She's the Ombudswoman at World Wildlife Fund. Round of applause, please. Thank you.
Hello, good day everybody. Lovely to be here and welcome to our session this afternoon on women at the heart of climate solutions. The UN's IPCC report released in April says that it is now or never to act if we are to meet the 1.5 degree target to limit global warming. So I'm delighted to be joined today by four remarkable women leading the charge on looking for climate solutions. We have Ina Braverman, who is the co-founder and CEO of EcoWave. We have Heather Pinnock, who's managing director of Lucea Caribbean Limited. We have Alejandra Mora, who is the Executive Director of the Inter-American Commission on Women. And we have Sophia Kianni, who is a climate activist and founder of Cardinals. So welcome and lovely to be here with you today. I'm going to turn first to you, Ina, looking at generating solutions from a private sector perspective, developing green energy from waves, and what that means in generating green energy and providing that green energy to the grid. Please, Ina, would you like to share with us how did you get into that line of work, first of all, and what, from your perspective, are some of the primary challenges in encouraging the private sector to shift toward green energy production?
So my story is quite unique. I live in Israel, but I wasn't born in Israel. I was actually born in Ukraine in 1986. And 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, which was the largest in history nuclear disaster in terms of costs and casualties. I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of the explosion. I actually had a clinical death, like a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. And luckily my mother, she approached my crib on time and she saw me pale and blue, not breathing. She gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and saved my life until the ambulance came. So I got a second chance in life. I don't remember any of it. I was a baby. But growing up, my family kept saying, wow, you got a second chance in life. Like, you should really do something with it. And then, renewable energy wasn't really popular when I was little. So I went to study politics. I thought, OK, I'll become this great politician, and this is how I will change the world. And when I finished the university, there was no lineup of politicians waiting to hire a young lady with a degree in political science. And then I ended up as a Hebrew-English translator in a renewable energy company, and that's what exposed me to the world. And I came up with my own ideas, my own solution, and in 2011, we established EcoWave Power with a business partner. And in terms of the challenges, usually I say that my biggest challenge, like in regular conferences, I say that it's bureaucratic challenges. Like, there's not enough regulatory framework, there's not enough legislation for innovative solution. Like, it takes time for the technology readiness level and the kind of policy readiness level to catch up. There's a big gap. But here I would actually like to say something personal. When in 2019, our company became the first Israeli company to ever list on NASDAQ Stockholm. It's a Swedish NASDAQ. And when we listed there, we were looking to hire a PR company. So we went to the biggest PR company in Sweden. And Sweden is super equality between male and female. And they made an amazing presentation. And then in the end of the presentation, I stayed in the room with one of the most senior ladies in the company. And she goes to me, you want a real advice? You want to be really successful on NASDAQ Stockholm? And I go, of course, like, you're much older, you're wiser, give it to me. She goes, you have to step down from being the CEO of the company and hire an older man with white hair. Oh. Because a woman would never be perceived by the financial markets as an expert, when a man will. So as you can see here, I did not step down. But But what I did learn from it, and I would like to share today, is that many times as women, people tell us that we're too weak, that we cannot do something, that we should step down, but we really should not step down. Because if we step down, our daughters will step down, and their daughters will step down. And then there's a very negative chain of events that is very difficult to stop. So please follow your dreams, follow your passion, because passion is the greatest renewable energy source, even stronger than the waves.
Excellent, thank you. And your passion, Inna, is absolutely infectious. And I'm going to turn to Heather just to share perhaps her personal journey too into the sustainable development arena and what challenges you might have faced in that regard.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, when I was 13 years old, I had I lived through in my mind what's still a horror movie. When I was 13 years old, I lived very happily with my parents and my sisters in a big yard, big trees and dogs, and I was happy. And then one day, Hurricane Gilbert came. When we heard a hurricane was coming, and we were actually excited at first because we had never experienced a hurricane, and we did preparations and all of that. And then the hurricane came with such force, and I was so horrified. I was horrified but in the face of Mother Nature and nature's fury. And it was wind and rain and just this howling that was horrific that I would never want to hear again. I have, of course, heard it hundreds of times since, but on that particular night, in the middle of the night during Hurricane Gilbert, our roof lifted. So a little before our roof lifted, we were standing up looking out, because we were kids peeping out, and our neighbor's roof flew off. And we were like, what just happened? You know, all of a sudden it was dark. The dark because the electricity was off. And all of a sudden there was light in our neighbor's house. So we're like, did they get electricity and they cut off ours? And then we realized that their roof was gone. And we started screaming, and we're like, you know, are they okay? And then while we were screaming, our own roof lifted. And I will never forget the moment. It comes back to me often. Standing in my living room, and my roof lifted above my head. And the roof lifted, and the wind was blowing, and leaves started splatting on her face, and the wind is howling, and it was a complete horror for me. I was 13 years old, and that memory stays with me forever. The hurricane occurred in September, and we did not get to go back to school until December. I think I went back to school maybe a week before Christmas. So there were months of just being in the house, but the thing that stood out to me the most that night and in the days after was that our house kept us alive, because I was like, what happens if we lose our roof? Will we die? What happens to the people who don't have roofs, you know? And from that moment, I was like, how do I do this? My first thought was, how do I do this? How do I build? How did whoever came up with my house, how did they do it, and can I do it better? And you know, and then I went to architecture school, and then after studying buildings and understanding buildings, I said, oh, how can I do it better? And I went and studied urban design. I'm like, because it can't be just a building, you know, there must be more. How do we look at how we lay out our cities? How do we look at how we do everything? And so that moment really transformed my whole career. And in terms of challenges, I would say, even today, I've had the pleasure of working not only in my own government in Jamaica, but in governments in Trinidad and in projects all across the Caribbean. We really struggle with resources. So a single event, a single storm event can destroy not only the physical resources of a country, it can not only take lives, but it can set a country back. So I'm going to use the example of Dominica because I think that one's a bit more recent. But Dominica had a Hurricane Maria, and just that single event completely decimated their GDP, removed all of their investments in roads, bridges, airports, everything was gone. So can you imagine as a country when you find the resources to invest in these things, and then one event, and please recall that we in the Caribbean spend 50% of our lives, half of our lives is hurricane season. 50% of our lives, we are aware of the clear and present danger of a storm. And if one event, and sometimes we have 20, 30 events in a hurricane season, one event can just remove all the work you've done. Dominica said that that single hurricane set them back 20 years. Now, how can you ever advance? How can you ever develop? How can you put money into education, into health, into anything if every year something comes and sets you all the way back. And I would say that is really our huge challenge. And so that is why 1.5 to stay alive was kind of the call of the Caribbean countries, the small and little developing states, back at COP in 2016, I think it was. But between that call, which we were really proud that, as small island states, we were on the global stage saying, we must achieve 1.5 to stay alive. And I remember feeling hope at that time and thinking, yes, the world finally hears us, the world finally agrees with us. But now here we are, and we have not achieved those goals. And it is really, I would say, the big challenge. We must achieve these goals. We must. And so I am heartened, even though I said I was heartened back in 2016, I'm heartened by the fact that in the last COP, we looked instead not just at a slogan, but very specifically at loss and damage. And loss and damage, of course, means a lot to me as a built environment professional, because the losses every time somebody loses everything from a roof to a building, to a bridge, to an airport, all these things set us back. And that is why it's so important to keep on this work. And the slogan 1.5 to stay alive remains. Climate change is real. It is real for a lot of us. And of course, hurricanes aren't the only thing. I left Jamaica yesterday and we were having both a heat wave and a drought. So I won't even go into the effects that those have. I'm just using hurricanes alone today. But yes, there is many challenges still, and we have to keep working.
Thank you so much, Heather, and for actually personalizing it and grounding us in reality, because I think some of us can think about climate change at a very theoretical level, and you've really helped personalize that for us. You've also helped touch on, I think, the role of government, because whether it's regulatory reforms or whether it's resilient urban development, we can't have these conversations around meeting the targets without the role of government. So turning to you, Alejandra, when I think about your role in an intergovernmental agency and the work you're doing around mainstreaming women's voice and looking for these solutions, do you want to share some reflections with us in that regard?
Yes, of course. First of all, I would like to say thank you for Vital Voices, because the alliance between women are very important, and between the organization is very strategic. I'm working in the Inter-American Commission of Women, so for us it's very strategic to talk what happened with the women and all about the climate change. And this is all that happen about women is invisible, is considered. What happened with the needs, with experience? What happened with when we're talking about the women and the intersectionality, how different forms of inequality operate and to exacerbate other risks. For example, indigenous women, what happened in the region? What happened with the women in the rural areas? Women migrants, women living in conflict areas. So for us, the climate change affects every single aspect of our lives. If you are a woman, you are really behind in the access to basic resources, such as food security, high quality health service, work access, educational access, land access. Women in the rural areas, for example, build their lives from agriculture. Since the most important economic activity in low and lower middle income countries, and yet own a very small proportion of land, and in comparison to the men. So for us, the most important thing is understand the mainstreaming and the experience and the needs in the changes in the climate change. And the big challenges is how the women stay in the making decisions, how the women can put the agenda of the women's in the mainstreaming of the decisions, how can change the visions to the women's like a victims, to change the vision and the focus, the women like a agents to change. This is the most important in this way. For us, like feminist women, I would like to talk we are colocando, we are putting the care in the mainstreaming of all the situations and the interpretations. We are putting the care in the people. We care the healthy, and we're talking about to care the land. This is important, and this is another perspective of how can push the agenda of the transformation and how to put the needs of the women in the mainstreaming of that discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Alejandra, because I think we all know that the impacts of global warming, climate change are experienced by women disproportionately, given their traditional roles in society, given cultural norms, and so on. Sophia, what drove you into establishing the Climate Cardinals? And I think picking up on Alejandra's idea of mainstreaming voice and women's voice in these challenges and finding solutions, can you share with us what drove you to get into the work that you do?
Yeah, of course. The mission of Vital Voices is really special to me because I started this work when I was 12 years old. I'm 21 now. But when I was 12 years old, I took a summer visit to Iran, which is my parents' home country. And while I was there, I was struck by how awful the air pollution was. I later learned that thousands of people are being hospitalized every single day in Iran because of the air pollution. And also that the Middle East is on the front lines of a climate crisis. So temperatures there are rising more than twice the global average. And I was really alarmed when I learned these things. And so I approached my relatives, hoping to engage in a conversation. And I was even more shocked when I realized that they had never heard about these buzzwords like global warming and climate change. And I found a study that actually said only 5% of Iranian students could properly explain the greenhouse gas effect. So there was a systemic lack of climate literature available in Farsi, which is Iran's native language. And so I worked with my mom after realizing this to translate climate resources into Farsi so that I could teach my relatives about what was already happening in their communities so that they hopefully could feel empowered to be part of the climate solution. And so this experience of working with my mom really inspired me. And in high school, I started to volunteer with various different grassroots climate organizations like Greta's Fridays for Future, until ultimately I started my own nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, when I was a senior in high school. And we now, really because of other young women who I work with, have grown to over 9,000 volunteers across 40 countries with an average age of just 16. And we've been able to translate over 1 million words of climate resources into over 100 languages just because of our youth-led volunteers.
Good.
And to me, that really just speaks to the power and the enthusiasm of young people and how desperately they want to be part of this solution to this problem that, quite honestly, we did not cause. And for me, it's really important to be here with all of you because I think it's really important for other young women to see. It's really hard to be something or to see someone and to think, can I be that person? Can I be part of the solution? And my goal has always been to show other young women that there's no reason why they can't be sitting up here too, talking to you all, especially because so much of my journey was powered through just working with my friends and inspiring them. Like my best friend Kat is here with me today, and she works with me every single day on Climate Cardinals work. You guys all heard from Helena earlier, and she's one of my best friends, and I'm so inspired by the work she's doing to protect the Amazon also at just 21 years old. And it really reaffirms to me that young people are currently the future. We're currently making change happen. And it's so important to foster this intergenerational dialogue because by ourselves we can go far, but with others we can go even further.
I think that's fantastic. Just inspiring and encouraging and giving so much hope. And perhaps turning frustration and anger into action is remarkable to hear. So keep up that excellent work. And on that high note of solutions, because you recognize that access to information and making that information accessible was a solution to an enormous challenge. I want to come back and give the rest of you an opportunity to perhaps share from your perspective. What are some of the highlights? Where are those lights at the end of the tunnel that we can focus on and work toward in meeting the targets that we have set? So let's come over to you, Ina.
So I'll start by giving 3 facts and 1 solution. So fact number 1, right now in the energy sector where I work, 95% of the executives and board members are men, only 5% are women. Fact number 2, 98% of the global VC funding is going to men. Only 2% are going to women. Fact number 3, which might surprise you, companies with women in their board or female founders or entrepreneurs perform much better than companies that do not have. So the solution, give us more money and give us a seat at the table, because the facts do not make sense.
Great, thank you. Heather, any simple solutions from you?
So I think solutions have such a wide range, and I'm following what she said. One of the important things, obviously, is to get funds to people who need it, right? But I always also talk about, as a building professional, that solutions aren't always big, huge things, and they're not always new things. And one of the things I do also is advocate to look at, what did our ancestors do that worked well? Simple things where you see those simple, cute houses that you see on Caribbean postcards. They're up on blocks for a reason. It takes you out of flood water. They have those pretty jalousies that we like to see in the fretwork because they filter the sunlight, make inside a little cooler, make living spaces better. And sometimes one of my favorite solutions that I like to talk about is the hurricane strap. The hurricane strap is a simple metal rod that's twisted. And what happens is you nail one end to the wall, to the beam, and you nail the other end to your roof. And that little thing holds on your roof. Remember I told the story of how I almost lost my roof? And that is a simple twisted bit of metal that we didn't have in 1988. And those little things make a huge difference. We don't lose as many roofs now as we did then. And so solutions can be huge, expensive, and they can also be very, very simple. And we have to be open to all of them.
And Heather, on that basis, are you finding it easy to get those solutions adopted across the sector? And if so, how are you making that happen?
Well, I think it's so awesome when you find something simple like that. And now it is now a standard, and it's now our building standard. And so that's also part of the work that I do, to try to introduce things into policy, into standards, and not only into policy, but into that kind of learned knowledge. So way back in before, when people built those houses, they didn't have a building code, but they learned from their neighbor that this works. So there, many levels you need to work on, encouraging people to look at simple solutions. But now, hurricane straps are standard. Even if it wasn't in the building code, everybody understands that it works. So, and it's cheap, so we use it. So I think, there are many ways in which we can not only find the solutions, but then disseminate them.
Great, thank you. Alejandra, any final remarks from your perspective, having heard the panel members talking about that enabling environment from a government perspective? Any other solutions you want to share with us in terms of mainstreaming gender voice in the climate solution space?
We need to raise the voices of the women in all in the subjects, amplification the women voices, and we need to the abilities of the women to take decisions, the empathy, the care, the articulations, the good negotiation. We need these abilities to change the world and to transform. We said, usually the feminists said, nothing about us without us. This is the best form to understand what happened with climate change and what they didn't need.
Great. Sophia, final word from you?
Well, I would just say that part of the reason it's so critical for women to be involved in climate solutions is because 80% of people who are displaced by climate change, climate refugees, are women. So, of course, it's so critical for the people who are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis to be part of the solutions making, especially also when you consider that it's people of color as well who are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So the more that we can bring voices to the table, like the voices of young people, like people my age, age are already experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis at a rate 3 times higher than our grandparents. And so having these voices at the table who understand the severity and the urgency with which we need to tackle the climate crisis, I think will really push progress forward.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation and for Pinnock. Thank you very much.